I love hero shooters. From Overwatch to Apex to Marvel Rivals, hero shooters have been a core part of the gaming landscape for the last 10 plus years. And recently, I made a video discussing clone characters in hero shooters, and a lot of people really did seem to enjoy this type of video series. So let's continue this series with our next archetype of characters, the turret heroes. To be a turret character, you simply have to have a turret, a fully automated machine or thing that shoots at enemies. No matter how good turret characters are, we can all agree that noobs absolutely don't like them. Like seriously, go to any Reddit page for any hero shooter and you got people complaining about turret characters all the time. And just like last time, I want to discuss these characters from the worst version of a turret character to the best. And this is more of a loose criteria. We're judging these characters by how high their peaks are and how long they were meta relevant throughout their career. So if they're not good now, that doesn't necessarily mean they weren't meta dominant before. And ultimately, I find it really fun to compare these similar designs. So without further ado, let's ask the question, how good are turrets in hero shooters? Starting with, unfortunately, the worst turret character. Torbjorn is the definitive turret character in Overwatch and Overwatch 2, and he's also one of the original Overwatch characters at launch. And his kit has gone through multiple iterations and overhauls. Before landing on his modern version of his ultimate where he just sprays lava everywhere, his ultimate used to just upgrade his turret. He also used to give people armor packs, which it was fine. But in the early days of Overwatch, his kit heavily revolved around his turret. And his turret was okay. Don't get me wrong, a good turret placement on defense can be very strong. But as you climb higher in the ranks, Torbjorn's utility consistently gets worse. And while Torbjorn's weapon can be very strong, it's a very difficult projectile to get a ton of value with, especially at longer ranges. For this video, I did end up talking to professional caster ZP, mostly about Deadlock, but we did talk about Torbjorn a little bit, and I actually want to quote him here because I think this is a great way to describe most turret characters from here on out. ZP says that turret characters are hit with a gun viability tax, meaning that if you compare the guns of turret characters to other DPS characters, you'll notice that turret characters usually have a significantly worse gun. The idea is that you can compensate the overall DPS with your turret that does auto-lock on enemies, but that does mean that if your turret gets destroyed, there are windows of time where your DPS is a lot worse. It kind of reminds me of Ice Climbers in Smash Bros. Melee. The moment you lose the second Ice Climber, you're kind of screwed, and while a lot of the other turret characters that we're going to talk about after Torbjorn do have the same problem when they lose their turret, I feel like Torbjorn gets hit the hardest in Overwatch, especially as new characters have been introduced that make it even harder for Torbjorn to get value. Many characters can take out the turret pretty easily. There were way too many metas that relied heavily on shielding, and the turret just kind of didn't do much against shields. So it was just never worth choosing Torbjorn over any of the other much stronger and more consistent DPS characters, even on defense. So unfortunately, that means that Torbjorn has never really seen any high-tier competitive level success, seeing virtually zero Overwatch League play when the Overwatch League was a thing. Remember the Overwatch League? But when he did show up, the crowds would roar because Torbjorn is still that guy, you know? I have nothing but love for Torbjorn. He's one of my favorite characters. I used to have a really big Funko Pop collection back when that was a thing, and I've gotten rid of most of my Funko Pops. I kept Torbjorn because I love the guy. I'm not a Torbjorn hater. I'm just stating facts. Unfortunately, it was just way too difficult for Torbjorn to compete in Overwatch. He was never really a part of the meta at the highest level. Side note, I do have a fond memory of watching Overwatch League live, and somebody did whip out Torbjorn, but man, the crowd genuinely so loud. It was so cool. It didn't work, but like it was cool. Next up, we have Deadlock. Deadlock isn't officially out yet, but there are Deadlock tournaments being hosted by the community, one of the bigger ones being the Deadlock Night Shift. And these tournaments feature the best players in Deadlock. And they're even casted by professionals like ZP. And since I'm not the most knowledgeable at the highest level of Deadlock, I did ask ZP for some insight. Please give him a follow if you haven't already. So let's talk about McInness. If you don't know what McInness does, she has the ability to create multiple turrets and also create big thorned walls that can create a ton of space for your team. McInness, very similar to Torbjorn, gets worse as the player's skill level gets higher. In the lower levels where people are less organized, McInness is actually quite effective, as most turret characters generally are. So in a more casual sense, she's not that bad. However, in the last 3 months of professional level play of Deadlock, she has 0% usage. And the reason is the turrets just become significantly less effective at the highest level of Deadlock, where people are just really cracked and really good at aiming and knowing when to use their abilities. So the turrets are just nowhere near as effective. And because of the extreme verticality of this game, her wall is actually a lot more easy to avoid as well. So her overall impact is unfortunately a lot lower. Early on in Deadlock's lifespan, McInness did see some competitive play, but it was usually just a very specific niche pick after a bunch of bans. And even then it was rare. So it's actually a very similar situation to a character like Torbjorn, where it's just very difficult to justify using McInness over other DPS characters in the game. And even if you make a build of McInness that isn't even focused on making the turrets that strong, the rest of her kit just unfortunately doesn't do enough in the game this fast. But I do personally love her ultimate. Of course I like it. I'm a baby. And I think it's very difficult to balance a character like McInness because she actually is very strong in pubs and in lower ranks. So buffing her kit at the highest level will have unfortunate side effects for the rest of the player base. So Valve is honestly in a tricky situation here. So that's where McInness is at. It's really debatable who's worse. So let me know in the comments down below, which one's worse, McInness or Torbjorn? Bareric is the turret character of Paladins. And while I used to jokingly mock his design as being a knockoff of Torbjorn, who's a knockoff of the engineer from TF2, and yes, I know that Paladins came first, it's just a joke, relax, I do think Bareric deserves a little bit more credit for how unique he actually is. Because unlike the rest of the turret characters I'm going to talk about today, he's the only turret character that is a tank. And most people play him as a point tank in this game, usually making a build that increases his survivability. While Bareric does have the ability to spawn turrets, he also has the ability to create shields, which allows for him to hold down a position very well. And it also guards the turret, so the turret does last a bit longer. And his ultimate is just more of the same. You create a dome shield and create a flame turret. So just more shields and more turrets. He's literally just shield plus turret. That's like his entire kit. It's very simple because he's one of the original Paladins characters. Compared to other tanks in this game, he is a bit squishier, so he does rely a lot more on his shields for his survivability. Now, from a competitive perspective, most people would argue that he's a fair tank, with nothing too overpowered or underpowered in his kit. There were times a couple years back where his pick rate was like the #1 pick rate of all characters in the game, but for the most part, he was never really meta defining. And this is partially because he is one of the original Paladins characters. His simplistic kit did lack a bit of depth, making his gameplay loop a little bit linear. And this definitely held him back as other more powerful tanks came into the fold. However, towards the end of Paladins, he was a decent tank and would see play at the highest level, especially after stronger tanks were banned. So he really was one of the most middle of the pack, average turret characters out of all the turret characters on this list. But honestly, when you really think about it, the things that make Bareric's kit very strong is less his turret and more his shielding. But the turret was still decent DPS, especially in a game like Paladins with a very high time to kill. RIP Paladins. Team Fortress 2 is the original hero shooter, the granddaddy of them all. And as you probably guessed, I'm not a Team Fortress 2 expert, especially at the highest level. I like to go for trick stabs with Spy and nothing else. But thankfully, my friend Seagull has played thousands of hours of Team Fortress 2 and gave me a bit of insight on the Engineer. So let's talk about the Engineer. Team Fortress 2 took a while to finally make a consistent competitive rule set, one of them being the 6v6 mode and the other one being Highlander, where you're forced to use every single class. So in the Highlander mode, you were kind of forced to use the Engineer, even if you didn't want to. So for the sake of this discussion, we'll talk more about the 6v6 mode. If you don't know what the Engineer does, the Engineer can build things. He can build a teleporter to move your teammates around a lot faster or to high places. He can build a dispenser to heal and supply your team as well. But most importantly, he can build turrets. But there were specific unlocks and items that could make the Engineer very broken. So broken that a lot of players prefer to just ban some of these items outright. Seagull mentioned that there was once a LAN event where it lasted 40 minutes because one of the items was unbanned. So yeah, these things were cancer, they were toxic. So I do think it's safe to say that the Engineer is a pretty solid turret character because of his turrets. But because there wasn't an official competitive rule set, this was mostly just an agreed upon thing by the tournament organizers. So it's actually kind of difficult to say how strong the Engineer was because after banning some of these things, he was more of a niche pick. And there are plenty of different items and unlocks that were also banned, so it's not just like Engineer was the only one that had that issue. But I do think there are a few more characters that have seen more consistent meta viability than the Engineer. So next, let's talk about... Now we're here in Marvel Rivals, and Marvel Rivals has a very unique turret character because he's the only turret character on this list whose turrets aren't machines. They're these octopus things. Namor has the ability to spawn these little squids that attack enemies nearby because they're like little turrets. But unlike a character like Torbjorn, Namor's main weapon is actually very strong. His trident does damage. And when you get killed by a whale that spawns out of the sky, it's not a great feeling. And competitively, Namor used to be very solid in Marvel Rivals. And that's mostly because he had some really broken team-ups. Initially, Namor's original team-up was with Luna Snow. This team-up is what made Namor very strong. At the time, this gave him a third turret, and this third turret had like ice powers, so your DPS output was significantly higher. And this was kind of a no-brainer team-up because Luna Snow was consistently one of the best support characters in the game. So what ended up happening is that Luna Snow would get banned all the time. And unfortunately, every single time Luna Snow got banned, nobody would really pick Namor because not having that extra DPS made a difference. Later on, Namor got a team up with the Hulk, which turned his turrets into gamma turrets, which were significantly stronger turrets, and that was also very strong. So you know what happened? Hulk would get banned, and then Namor saw no usage. So it's kind of difficult to say if Namor was that strong or if the team up specifically was that strong, because there are plenty of characters who are good without their team ups, but Namor's entire lifespan has been him kind of riding off the coattails of the team ups. Don't get me wrong, he was great when the team ups were active and not banned, but when they were banned, you just wouldn't want to use him. And now currently Namor has a team up with Hela that gives him an entire AoE damage thing that does anti-healing, and also every time you get a kill or an assist with Hela, a turret spawns. It's a little too soon to say if that's going to be broken, but I'm willing to bet that's going to be broken, especially because Hela is one of the best DPS characters, so most people are already playing Hela anyway, so might as well play Namor too. This will probably end up leading to Hela being banned all the time, and subsequently leading to Namor not seeing any usage. So undeniably, I would say that Namor is very good in Marvel Rivals, and it's actually because his turrets are really strong, but with an asterisk, as long as a team up is active. But while I do think he is a lot stronger than the previous characters I talked about, our final character is easily the strongest turret character, and she is... And finally, we have Killjoy from Valorant. Killjoy is actually in a very unique position because Valorant is a very unique game compared to these other games we just talked about. Killjoy has the ability to create a bunch of different traps as well as turrets. And these turrets don't do a ton of damage, but it's the utility that they provide for your team that really puts Killjoy above all these other characters. In a game like Valorant, knowledge is power, and Killjoy is able to hold down defensive bomb sites with ease, with her ultimate being the epitome of creating space. But I do want to point out that Killjoy isn't the best character all the time. She is the best character on defense on specific maps like Ascent or Bind, where she has really strong turret placements that make holding down a point very, very easy. But that does mean that there are a ton of other maps where you're not going to see Killjoy at all. But the fact that she is one of the best characters on a ton of different maps means that undeniably Killjoy is a great character in Valorant. And it's cool because it really is because her turrets are just that good. It turns out that having automatic turrets in a tactical shooter where map information and aim are the most important is kind of broken. Now, before I get to the conclusion, I do want to bring up some honorable mentions of characters that are kind of turret characters that I think are worth having a small discussion about, but I'll explain why I didn't have a full segment on them. First, there's Maestro from Rainbow Six Siege. Every single character that I discussed had automated turrets, and Maestros aren't automated. They're him controlling it completely. I think if I included Maestro, it would open a floodgate where, do I include Bastion in his original form? Do I include the Punisher's turret? Those feel like a different subclass entirely. So that's ultimately why I decided not to include Maestro in this video. And I guess that also means not the Punisher or Bastion. I don't think you guys were thinking they were turret characters. My next honorable mention is the Finals Medium class. Medium players have the option of 3 specializations, one of which is a Guardian turret, which acts very similar to like a Torbjorn turret. The thing is, the Finals isn't technically a hero shooter, but you could make the argument that it would be worth including, and I also just absolutely adore the Finals, and any excuse to talk about the Finals is a good thing for me. By the way, long story short, the Finals Guardian turret is just not that good right now, and it's only ever really been decent when it was the only option you had besides healing. There are some crazy professional players in Asia that are using multiple turrets in their compositions, but that's because things are getting banned. But hey, that's an honorable mention. I'm spending way too much time talking about it. Our last honorable mention is Symmetra. I know a lot of people are probably thinking that she for sure should have been on this list, but her turrets are significantly different than these other turrets when it comes to their range and the way that they function. To me, they feel a little bit more like about traps, because their health pool is so small and their damage output is not that significant either, that to me they feel more like a trap in a similar vein to a character like Watson. So maybe I'll include Symmetra in a video about trap characters like Caustic and Watson, but I do think realistically the most important and most impactful part of her kit is her teleporter, so I'm gonna save her for an overall video on portals, like Doctor Strange, Wraith, and Symmetra. I just didn't feel like her turrets were turrets, you know? Feel free to disagree, just know I will talk about her in the future. So that is every single turret character in hero shooters. So now, if I had to answer the question, how good are turret characters in hero shooters? I think, simply put, very solid at controlling a point, and even better if the character has a good gun to go with it. Like a Trident, or any gun that Killjoy players can use, because Killjoy can use any gun anyone can use. That's probably why Killjoy is the best, actually, because they have the entire arsenal of weapons at their disposal. But what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment on each of these turret characters? Please let me know if there's any information that I got completely incorrect. I read your comments in the last video, and this time around I really tried to be thorough with my research, but I am not perfect, and finding information on games, especially dead ones, can be very hard. So please let me know all about it in the comments down below. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.